Good evening, everybody. So as she described that I'm a serial entrepreneur, today I'll not be really wearing a hat of being a digital crime or digital forensics expert. But I got involved with a very interesting group of people, and that's the story which I'm going to narrate today. So the theme of this TEDx talk is about sustainability, and of course the bigger theme is past, present, and future. So I'm going to take you through a journey of how this group of people came in about 10 years back and started thinking of how they could get into challenging areas and then build a sustainable business. As we all know that the rural purse is very thin. I think the speaker before us, he described about agriculture. I mean, 69 to 70% of our population is engaged in agriculture, and they're all in the villages. So if you look at the purse, most of the time this purse has been filled by these subsidies or the schemes or the government programs and so on and so forth. Or there has to be some savings over there. So unless the purse or the wallet, the rural wallet gets filled, there is no way that there's going to be a spending power over there. As we all know that the spending power is very, very low, so the solutions or the interventions which has to go into the rural has to be very, very thoughtful. So the story which I'm going to tell you is about how to connect rural India. First, I'm going to the rural realities. I don't know how many of you know about technologies which have been working in the rural areas. For example, in early days, there was something known as satellite communication called VSAT. And VSAT used to connect people across far-flung locations where wires couldn't reach. Nowadays, we hear about 3G, we hear about LTE or 4G, which are broadband technologies which are going to be affecting our lives in urban areas. But unfortunately, 3G or 4G rollouts in the rural areas are going to be very, very tough and challenging, both from the cost perspective as well as from the perspective of reaching out there. So what are the solutions? I think if we think about some of the solutions, this experiment started in 2005 when Wi-Fi, all of us know what Wi-Fi is, Wi-Fi became deregulated. All of us also know that India, there are airwaves which we actually auction today, which is called spectrum. Now the spectrum is very, very expensive if we were to talk about operators, going in auction and bidding for them. But fortunately, the government in 2005, they deregulated the Wi-Fi band, which is called the 2.4 gigahertz band, and then subsequently a band called 5.8 gigahertz band. Now with these two bands open up, suddenly the possibilities came about. So these two Israelis, Yael and Michael, these two came and they started an experiment in the hills up there in north, Dharamshala. And they started building a network, which was essentially a network built for 8 nodes. Then this concept was actually showcased by Jim Foster, who was the chairman of this group. And he went to Abdul Kalam and said that India could adopt some of these kind of things. Now, what are the issues with the rural landscape? One of the major issues is the availability of access there, availability of power. The challenges are the cost which a rural rural citizen can actually pay for the services. That's because the low incomes are there. Now let's look at how or what really is required to build a network. So there is something known as backhaul, and backhaul is something which would come in form of fiber optic or in form of wireless backhauls. Now where this backhaul comes from? These backhauls typically come from telecom companies who lay fiber optic up to a district location, and from that district location you actually have to reach out the internet or the broadband connectivity to the rural endpoint. And that's where AirJaldi comes in. AirJaldi comes in with two things. One is it creates the middle of the last mile, and it also helps give power. fortunately, our country has a huge solar footprint. And that's the reason why, even solar panels could be used to power these low powered devices. And then, of course, the idea is to build teams with local talent, and then clients have to the local ecosystem, things like, your common service centers, your educational institutions, healthcare centers, agriculture advisory centers, and so on and so forth. One of the unique things which AirJaldi tried to do was to see the networking doesn't remain in the realms of, the engineering schools. Today, they have programs called Networking 101 or Networking 108, which actually can teach a village kid on how to build these low-cost networks, how to climb up the small little pole or tower, how to put a Wi-Fi router, how to connect that to an Ethernet port, and so on and so forth. And these programs have been able to, they've been able to train more than 2,000 people in the rural, landscape today. So I'm not saying that they have gone through a formal engineering degree or a polytechnic education, but they know how to build, manage, and maintain these networks. So if we look at some of the interventions which have actually happened in the field, there's an organization called IFMR, which is one of the microfinancing institution, basically an offshoot of ICICI Bank. And then they started, coming up with programs where they would go out and open up a small little branch in a village, which will help give out microloans or, get savings habits among the rural citizens. So they needed connectivity. And if you look at the Kumaon and the Garhwal region, these are all hills. Not even BSNL reaches some of these places. So what was the way? The way was to take the backhaul from a known place or a district and then fly it out through wireless mechanisms to these far-flung locations. So today, more than 40 branches of IFMR are connected in far-flung places around the Kumaon and the Garhwal belt. I don't know how many of you really been to those areas. Going by road is also treacherous in the sense that if you have to travel even 80 kilometers or 100 kilometers, it will take you at least 6 to 8 hours to even reach those places. So these networks have been built by people who have been locally, trained by the AirJaldi team, which is then able to build these networks. Then Google came out and they said, we want to see how education could reach out to rural places. Now, as I say, technology is always, an enabler. But at the same time, it can actually, bridge the digital divide. The speaker before us talked about food. Food is these necessary, ingredient or element for all of us to, live. However, if a villager or a farmer is able to then utilize technology in a way that he can, maybe improve his yield or make his, agriculture produce not to get damaged during the, disaster situations. So when we talk about India, India has a lot of talented people. In fact, while having my, lunch, Pradeep was mentioning that when he went to America, or if he compares himself with Japanese, most of the Indian people are very intelligent, but we need to be more focused. In the sense that the education reaches there through interactive mechanisms, which is e-learning. Google did, reach out to many schools, and they needed a broadband connectivity. So that's where AirJaldi helped. Now, people say that, BPOs are something which is attracting a lot of rural people or the C-level or B-level town to now come in and live in, large metros. But there is this very interesting, gentleman who used to work for a large BPO here as a manager, and he had love for hills. So he went back to his village or village clusters and then opened the BPO there. So he carried the work, to the place where people were living. And, the kind of savings which these kids are doing, the kind of learning which these, village kids are doing today, so they've become a global, BPO arm sitting out of a rural location. Now they needed heavy connectivity, and that connectivity was the reason why a rural BPO could flourish. E-governance is something which is very high on the agenda of the government. If you know about a program called the Common Service Center, which is like a Seva Kendra, where you have all the e-governance applications are made available on a kiosk or on a computer to the village clusters. So there are about 100,000 CSCs which have been planted in India today. And some of them have failed because the government could make broadband reach those places. And these CSCs are not only the G2C kind of programs, but they are also B2C programs. I mean, today a villager can go and book a ticket, unreserved ticket or a reserved ticket on a IRCTC website thanks to an internet reaching there. So what are the four things which rural connectivity would primarily need from a leverage perspective? One is the infrastructure. And infrastructure is available because there is a lot of towers which are there in the country, more than about 500,000 towers which are there, provided there is a sharing which is allowed amongst the tower players. Second is the bandwidth, and bandwidth is something which would come from the fiber optic players. So today there is a lot of duplication and replication which is happening, and that's the reason why the bandwidth which is at the backhaul is not really available at lower cost. Third is the legal or the regulatory aspects, where the license cost or the spectrum cost is something which is exorbitantly high for any rural play to really happen. And finally, the clients have to come from the local ecosystems only. So AirJaldi is primarily looking at two things. One is if the tower and power could be shared. Second is there's a program which is a very ambitious program with the government, which is called the NFON, which is where they want to reach out to every Gram Panchayat with a 100 Mbps backhaul pipe. So AirJaldi can take the backhaul from there and then build an umbrella network for the cluster of those 6 villages which are part of the network. So how a wireless network is built is it's like a branch of tree where one knock is built, and then after that the pops are built, and then you can keep on growing them. So it's not like a network which is a GSM network, which is over-compassing, that once you put the network, then everybody gets connected there. In a wireless or a Wi-Fi network, you keep on connecting as the need grows. So it's a very cost-effective method of reaching out internet to people. So if you look at the rural past, we had people who were looking for roti, kapda and makan, which is the basic need for a human being to survive. And then if you look at the present, we have passed some of those needs, but we need a lot of other intervention. But in future, I think if we can bring or remove the digital divide by bringing a concept called digital village, which of course the first digital village is coming up now in Idukki in Kerala, where most of the things from e-governance perspective or from the private perspective will have coverage over the connectivity. So today, from a very humble beginning of 2005 of 8 nodes, today AirJaldi is available in 7 states and growing. There's a lot still to do, but with more than 20,000 rural connects, AirJaldi probably is one of the largest rural Wi-Fi providers in the country. So if you look at the Digital India vision, we have 120 crore people, and out of that only some 19% are connected on the internet. So there's still a lot to go, and I think one of the things which is happening today is that the smartphones have come down to a level of $50 or less, which will actually penetrate more and more growth. Aspirations are growing not only for the urban people, but let's not undermine our rural folks, because they also have minds, they also have talent. Only thing is that they need is exposure, and they need technologies to reach them. So in the Maslow's hierarchy, now we have 2 more layers which have come on the bottom. One is of course the Wi-Fi and the battery. People come back and tell me that mobile phones are no more mobile phones, they are landline phones back again, because they're always connected to an electrical point for charging themselves. So in rural, solar can be leveraged very well because of the footprints of sun being around in this country also the Wi-Fi, which can make people reach out to the internet. There are many people, and we keep on getting calls from many people who have, achieved a lot in their lives, and they still want to come back, to their own villages or to their own hinterlands, as long as they are able to, they are connected. So I'm sure we can see a lot of not only NRIs, but also a lot of people who work in urban areas to go back and contribute back to their villages. So this is my favorite line, although this is competitive, because Coke never came with Ye Dil Mange More. But what I fundamentally believe is that in rural areas, it's not about 256 kbps, or it's not about 512 kbps. It has to be in multiples of Mbps, because if we can reach out video, if we can reach out audio, these are language-independent methods or mediums, to reach out to people. So it's not about literacy. If you can reach out to them using higher bandwidths, and the only way to reach out higher bandwidths is the fiber optic, which is going to be very, very expensive, or the other way is to quickly reach out using Wi-Fi, which is in a free band. So, unveiling threats, deploying networks, and unleashing potential of internet, that's the mission which AirJaldi has. Last but not the least, with Digital India vision and internet reaching out to everybody, I think we should also teach them the ethics of use of IT or internet. Otherwise, what will happen is that with this 120 crore people, workforce which we would have, should not become cyber criminals. So we need to teach them the traffic rules, and while we are giving them the connectivity options. With that, I would like to end my talk. Thank you very much.